What if everything you thought you knew about wealth, humanity, and trust was just an illusion? What if your treatment was determined not by your worth, but by how much you have in your bank account? Stay with me, because what you're about to witness will shatter your perceptions of corporate America. Ibrahim Traore, a self-made billionaire and renowned philanthropist, had seen the divide between the rich and the poor firsthand. But today, he was going to take it a step further. He was going to expose how easily society and its systems could turn a blind eye to those in need. For weeks, he meticulously planned the ultimate social experiment. Ibrahim, known for his charitable donations to the homeless and his public image as a generous man, decided to put the financial system to the ultimate test. His target, a prestigious bank in San Francisco, known for its elite clientele and cutting-edge financial services. Ibrahim's goal wasn't to expose their employees' incompetence or flaws but to shine a light on the unconscious biases that plague even the most refined institutions. He knew what would happen when someone walked in dressed in designer clothes, but what would happen when a man who looked like he had nothing walked into their doors? Could the bank be trusted to help anyone in need, or was it just a machine designed to favor the rich? To carry out his plan, Ibrahim spent days researching the behaviors and reactions of the homeless in the city, observing how they were treated in public spaces. He chose his disguise carefully: a tattered, oversized coat, a scruffy beard, a face that screamed despair. He made himself look unkempt and disheveled, as though he had been living on the streets for months. He even took a bus to the area around the bank to make sure he blended in with the local homeless population. The day of the experiment arrived. Ibrahim, now fully disguised, stood at the door of the high-end bank, just a stone's throw from the towering skyscrapers of Silicon Valley. The gleaming marble floors and polished glass walls stood in stark contrast to the ragged figure that entered the building. Ibrahim could feel the eyes of the security guards and bank staff on him as he made his way toward the counter. He walked up to a teller, his voice low but clear, asking for help. I need to open an account. I don't have much, but maybe you can give me a chance." His heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his composure. The teller's expression immediately soured. "I'm afraid we require an initial deposit to open an account," she said curtly, glancing down at his worn-out clothes. "Do you have identification? Something official?" Ibrahim nodded, handing over an old, frayed ID he had created for the experiment. He could see the teller's judgment in her eyes, though she said nothing further. She barely looked at it. Her tone was cold, dismissive, like the man in front of her was invisible. Within moments, he was shooed away, told that they could not assist him. Her indifference stung. But Ibrahim wasn't ready to give up. He knew this was just the beginning. The seed had been planted. As Ibrahim turned to leave, a pit grew in his stomach. This was it. The perfect setup. The camera crew hidden around the bank captured every moment of the exchange. His mind raced with anticipation, but he knew the real test wasn't yet over. The mask of desperation had been ignored. Now, it was time to peel it off and expose the truth. What if the system you trusted to protect you actually leaves you out in the cold? Imagine being in desperate need, seeking nothing more than a lifeline, only to be turned away, judged not for who you are, but for how you appear. Keep watching, because the truth is about to come to light. As Ibrahim stepped out of the bank and onto the bustling streets of San Francisco, his heart raced. The feeling of rejection gnawed at him, but it wasn't personal. It was precisely what he had expected, a stark example of the cold, calculating nature of a financial system that favored the privileged and overlooked the desperate. His disguise had worked, he had been treated as nothing more than an inconvenience. But the experiment was far from over. Ibrahim needed to understand just how deep this issue ran. He couldn't let this moment slip by. It wasn't just about this one bank, it was about the millions of people like him who had no voice in the system. People who were pushed aside because of how they looked or how little they had. Ibrahim wasn't angry, he was determined. He stood outside the bank for a moment, watching people stream in and out, many dressed in sharp suits, some with designer bags, others looking like they had just closed their latest multi-million-dollar deal. He couldn't help but wonder how many of them, if they were in his shoes, would have been treated the same way. He wanted to know if the situation would change if he were someone else, if he weren't the ragged, homeless figure he'd pretended to be. With a deep breath, Ibrahim turned back to the door of the bank. This time, his appearance remained the same, but his approach was different. He was about to see if the staff's behavior could change based on something as simple as their perception of wealth. Ibrahim approached a second teller, this one with short, stylish hair and a friendly smile. She greeted him with a warm, "How can I help you today?" Ibrahim's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't treating him like the previous teller had. Was this going to be different? Perhaps he had been too quick to judge the whole system. I need to open an account, Ibrahim said, his voice trembling slightly, a perfect act of vulnerability. I don't have much, but I need somewhere to put what little I have. My money, my savings. The teller's eyes softened for a brief moment. But then, as if she noticed his condition again, his worn clothes, the dirt on his shoes, her smile faltered. She glanced at her computer screen and her posture stiffened. I'm sorry, but without the proper documentation and initial deposit, there's really nothing we can do for you. The words felt like daggers. Ibrahim swallowed, trying to keep his composure, and nodded slowly. I understand. Thank you for your time. As he turned to leave, he noticed the staff exchanging glances behind the counter. One of the security guards gave him a long, hard stare. He felt the weight of judgment again. The entire building seemed to echo with the subtle message, "You don't belong here." This wasn't about incompetence, it was about something much deeper, ingrained bias. The system had set itself up to serve those who looked like they had something to offer. He wasn't a person to them, he was a problem to be avoided. Outside the bank, Ibrahim's mind was racing. He had hoped for a glimmer of humanity, a sign that the bank would see him as someone worthy of assistance despite his appearance. But what he had witnessed was a stark, unforgiving reality. He wasn't just turned away because he didn't have money, he was turned away because the system's priorities were based on appearances, on wealth, on power. Ibrahim needed a plan. He couldn't let this experiment end here. He had to take this further, he had to make people see the stark divide, the way society ignored those without power and riches. But there was one final piece to this puzzle, one crucial revelation that would set everything into motion. Ibrahim wasn't finished. In fact, his most powerful move was yet to come. What happens when you strip away everything, your wealth, your status, your identity, and reveal the truth? The shocking moment that changes everything is about to unfold. Hold tight, because the experiment is about to take a jaw-dropping turn. The next part of Ibrahim's plan was simple, yet filled with suspense. He had already been dismissed and ignored, not because he had no money, but because of his appearance, his social status, how society saw him. But Ibrahim wasn't going to let that stop him. He had seen enough to know what was wrong, but he needed to expose it to the world. So, he made a choice, it was time to take off the mask. Ibrahim returned to the bank later that afternoon, the same one that had turned him away just hours before. This time, however, he was no longer the disheveled, homeless man begging for help. Instead, he was Ibrahim Traore, the renowned billionaire philanthropist. He walked into the bank, his tailored suit sharp against the backdrop of luxury. His confident step echoed through the same marble floors where just moments ago, he had been treated as invisible. The contrast was striking. He approached the same teller, the one who had dismissed him so easily earlier. She was standing behind the counter, now chatting with a colleague. When she noticed Ibrahim walking toward her, her face froze. She glanced at him, recognition flashing across her eyes. It only took a moment before she pieced it together. His eyes met hers, and for a split second, she looked away, clearly uncomfortable. Ibrahim smiled knowingly. "Do you remember me?" he asked calmly. Her cheeks flushed red. You were here earlier," she said, her voice faltering. "But, you were," she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "That's right," Ibrahim said, his tone now filled with calm authority. I was the man you turned away earlier today. The one you couldn't help because I looked like I didn't belong. Because I didn't have an initial deposit or the right documentation to make you feel comfortable. But here I am again. Only now, I'm someone else. I am Ibrahim Traore, and I own more than this entire building is worth. The teller's face turned pale. She stumbled over her words, her eyes darting nervously. I didn't know, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't mean. Ibrahim raised a hand to stop her. You didn't mean to? No. You meant exactly what you did. You dismissed me. You saw someone in need, and because of the way I looked, you couldn't be bothered to help. But now, because I am someone you recognize, someone with power, with wealth, with status, your entire demeanor has changed. The bank's manager, who had overheard the conversation, rushed over. His face was stern, his eyes darting between Ibrahim and the teller. Is there a problem here, sir? He asked, his voice tight with nerves. Ibrahim didn't miss a beat. There is a problem, yes. The problem is that this bank, and the people working in it, only value me because of how much I can offer you financially. When I had nothing, you treated me like a nuisance. When I have something, suddenly, I'm worth your time. That's the problem. The manager's expression shifted, and a flicker of guilt passed through his eyes, but it quickly faded. I apologize, sir, he said, his voice cool. We don't usually conduct ourselves this way. Please, allow me to make this right. Ibrahim chuckled softly, his gaze unwavering. You don't get it, do you? You don't need to make anything right. This is the system at work. I'm just one person, but imagine how many others you've done this to, how many people have walked through these doors only to be turned away because they didn't look like the people you value most. The tension in the room thickened. The staff, who had been watching the exchange, now looked at one another nervously. Some avoided making eye contact, while others whispered amongst themselves. The message had been delivered, loud and clear. The truth had been exposed, and there was no turning back. But Ibrahim wasn't done. He pulled out his phone and showed the manager the footage from earlier, footage of him in his homeless disguise, being ignored and rejected by the same people who were now treating him with deference. The manager's face turned red, but he remained silent. I hope you take this lesson to heart, Ibrahim said, his tone firm yet calm. It's not about what you see on the outside. It's about what's inside, about who we are as people, not as economic transactions. As Ibrahim turned and walked out of the bank, he could feel the weight of the moment. His experiment was more than just a test, it was a wake-up call. Society had a long way to go, and so did the systems that ran it. But at least, for now, he had exposed the cracks. When the truth is laid bare, the consequences are far-reaching. What happens when the public is forced to confront the very biases they don't even know they have? The fallout from Ibrahim's experiment is about to set the financial world, and the public, on fire. The fallout from Ibrahim's bold reveal was immediate and intense. Within hours, the footage of his interaction with the bank had gone viral. News outlets, social media platforms, and even late-night talk shows were buzzing with outrage. Headlines screamed of the billionaire's shocking social experiment, but what truly captured the world's attention was the stunning contrast between how he had been treated as a homeless man and how he was respected as a wealthy businessman. People from all walks of life weighed in. Some defended the bank, claiming that it was simply following its policies. The system is what it is, one financial analyst said. Banks have rules for a reason. Ibrahim's stunt was unnecessary. But others were furious. Many felt a deep sense of injustice, pointing out that Ibrahim's treatment had exposed a truth they had long suspected. That people were judged not by their needs but by their appearance, by their perceived value in the eyes of society. Social media exploded with discussions about inequality, discrimination, and the role of wealth in shaping one's experiences. Hashtags like #BrokeOrBillionaire and #BankBias trended worldwide, as millions of people shared their own stories of being treated unfairly or dismissed because of their appearance or lack of wealth. Some even flooded the bank's social media pages with comments, calling for accountability. But the real shock came when the bank was forced to make a public statement. In a press conference, the bank's CEO, a stern-looking man in his late 50s, took the podium. He looked uncomfortable, as if the weight of the controversy was too much to bear. The footage was played in the background on a large screen, showing Ibrahim in both his homeless disguise and in his billionaire persona. The CEO, trying to maintain composure, began speaking. "We deeply regret the unfortunate incident involving Mr. Ibrahim Traore," he began, his voice steady but lacking conviction. "While our staff was simply following standard procedures, we acknowledge that the treatment Mr. Traore received was unacceptable. We are committed to reviewing our training and ensuring that no customer, regardless of their background, feels disrespected or dismissed. We understand that trust is earned, and we intend to earn that trust again." But the public wasn't buying it. The damage was done. People were no longer focused on the bank's policies, they were focused on the humanity of the situation. The bank's vague apology fell flat in the face of an overwhelming public outcry. Meanwhile, Ibrahim watched the drama unfold from the comfort of his luxury apartment. He was pleased by the response but not surprised. He knew that his experiment had done its job. It had brought the issue of class bias into sharp focus and forced people to confront their own preconceived notions about the poor and the rich. What disturbed Ibrahim most, though, was not the backlash against the bank, it was the realization of how deeply rooted these biases were in the system. The bank's quick apology and vague promises to do better were a clear sign that, at least in the short term, nothing was going to change. The financial system would continue to operate as it always had, and people like him, those who had wealth, power, and influence, would continue to enjoy the privileges that came with it. But Ibrahim wasn't ready to let this moment slip away. As much as the public outcry had been satisfying, he knew that a single incident wouldn't change the system. He had made his point, but the question was, would anyone listen? Or would it all fade into another viral moment that lost its impact after a few weeks? Determined to push for real change, Ibrahim called a meeting with his team. The next step in his plan was clear: he would turn the focus back to the people who had no voice, the ones who were still being ignored by the systems meant to protect them. It was time to bring the conversation beyond a single bank, and into the halls of government, into the media, and onto the streets. As Ibrahim began planning his next move, the world outside continued to react. People were talking. People were angry. People were demanding answers. And Ibrahim knew that if he could channel this energy into something constructive, it could spark real change. The real question was, would anyone be brave enough to listen? The truth has been exposed, the world has reacted, and now the question remains, can one experiment spark lasting change? Ibrahim Traore's journey is far from over. This is just the beginning, an awakening that could reshape the very fabric of the financial system. The final chapter will leave you questioning everything. The aftermath of Ibrahim's social experiment had far exceeded his expectations. What had started as a single act of defiance, an experiment to test the biases ingrained in the financial system, had blossomed into a global conversation. The issue wasn't just about one man being turned away from a bank, it was about the larger system that allowed such treatment to happen in the first place. The experiment had exposed a crack in the veneer of corporate America, and now the whole world was watching. Ibrahim knew that he could not let this moment fade into obscurity like so many other viral stories. He had planted the seed, but now it was time to cultivate it. He had one goal in mind: to drive a movement that forced businesses, banks, and governments to address the inequality at the heart of their systems. It wasn't long before Ibrahim began receiving invitations to speak at forums, news channels, and social media platforms. He became a voice for the voiceless, and his message was clear: the system was broken. The wealthy and powerful were treated with respect and given opportunities that the most vulnerable would never see. It wasn't just about financial disparity, it was about dignity, about seeing people as human beings, not as dollar signs. He started by organizing a massive rally in Washington, D.C., bringing together activists, community leaders, and everyday people who had experienced the same biases Ibrahim had faced. On the day of the rally, thousands gathered, many holding signs reading #BrokeOrBillionaire and #Equality in Finance. The atmosphere was electric, charged with hope, anger, and a sense of unity. Ibrahim took the stage, and for the first time, he spoke not as a billionaire, but as a man who understood what it felt like to be ignored, to be dismissed by a system that was meant to help. "I'm not here today because I'm a rich man who can afford to make noise," Ibrahim told the crowd, his voice strong and unwavering. "I'm here because I've seen how our society treats people based on the money they have in their pockets. I've seen how we, as a nation, value some people over others. And that ends today." The crowd erupted into applause, and Ibrahim's words struck a chord across the country. People flooded social media with their stories of being denied loans, being treated as invisible because of their background, their appearance, or their financial status. For the first time, it felt like people were speaking out about an issue that had been swept under the rug for too long. But Ibrahim wasn't finished yet. He used his platform to call on lawmakers and financial leaders to take real action. He began a campaign to reform the banking industry, demanding that institutions be held accountable for the way they treated their customers, regardless of their social standing. He argued that financial institutions should focus on helping people rebuild their lives, not just on maximizing profits for the wealthy. He also proposed a series of legislative changes, advocating for increased transparency, equal access to financial services, and the elimination of policies that discriminated against the poor. His campaign gained traction, and soon, he was in meetings with lawmakers who were eager to understand how they could help make the changes he was calling for. One major breakthrough came when a few prominent politicians in Congress took notice of Ibrahim's efforts. They introduced a bill that would require banks to provide more support for low-income individuals, including easier access to small loans and financial education programs for the disadvantaged. It wasn't everything Ibrahim wanted, but it was a start. The ripple effect of his experiment had turned into a movement, and slowly, but surely, change was beginning to take root. The media attention continued to snowball, and Ibrahim became an unlikely hero in the eyes of many. People saw him not just as a wealthy businessman, but as someone who used his resources to challenge the system and push for change on behalf of those who had no voice. By the time the year came to a close, Ibrahim had seen the first steps toward the kind of change he had hoped for. His social experiment had sparked a nationwide conversation about inequality, and though it hadn't solved all the problems, it had exposed the deep flaws in a system that prioritized wealth over humanity. As Ibrahim stood at the podium once again, this time in front of a crowd of supporters, he reflected on how far the journey had come. His voice, once ignored, was now a symbol of hope. His experiment had shown the world the truth. It wasn't about how much you had, it was about who you were. "I'm not done," Ibrahim said, his eyes bright with determination. "This is just the beginning. We've made progress, but we still have a long way to go. The system will change, but only if we keep pushing, keep fighting. Together, we will make sure that no one is ever judged by how much they have, or don't have, again." And with that, Ibrahim Traore's story became more than just a viral experiment. It became the catalyst for a movement that sought to transform society and its financial systems into a place where everyone, regardless of their wealth, was treated with dignity and respect.